Добрый день, дорогие друзья. Спасибо, что собрались. Наш фонд продолжает серию публичных лекций, встреч молодых украинцев нашего нового поколения с выдающимися лидерами, политическими лидерами современности. В этом году мы уже организовали много таких встреч, а сейчас это будет, уже под Новый год, такая одна из самых необыкновенных, но очень важных встреч. Потому что говорить про безопасность на Украине сегодня, это, я думаю, важнейшая экзистенциональная тема для нас с вами. И мы пригласили для обсуждения трех ведущих мировых специалистов в этом направлении. Мы организовываем серию круглых столов по обсуждению этой темы. Значит, они уже встречались сегодня в закрытом пространстве, off the records, с ведущими специалистами украинскими. И сейчас они будут разговаривать с вами. Значит, кто это? Эштон Картер, он был министром обороны в правительстве Обамы, ведущий специалист. 4-звездных, 2 генерала мы к вам привезли. Уэсли Кларк, который, вы знаете, он знаменитый, он еще был командующим войсками НАТО в Европе. Он с 2014 года, он, по-моему, раз 10 посещал Украину, 2014 года. Он вовлечен во все эти наши военные действия. И 4-звездный генерал Джек Кин. Так, чтобы понять, кто он. Президент Трамп ему первому предложил позицию министра обороны, но он по личным причинам не смог принять этого предложения, рекомендовал генерала Мэттиса. Так что вот такой уровень гостей, с которыми вы встречаетесь. Для вас это должно быть не только интересно, но и на вас есть ответственность. Вы должны тоже показать, насколько молодым украинцам важна тема безопасности украинской. Потому что они приедут туда, и у нас есть много вопросов к американцам, к американскому правительству о том, как Америка должна участвовать в решении этих вопросов здесь. Поэтому вы тоже должны показать, не только их послушать, но и что-то им рассказать. Я вам желаю интересной встречи и please welcome our guests. Поэтому я хочу сказать, что модератор встречи будет знаменитый журналист из BBC Стивен Сакер. Так что прошу, welcome our guests. Please. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Victor, and welcome everybody. I'm going to introduce you as my panel. Please, panel, take a seat. And it's my very great privilege to be the moderator and host of today's event. It's wonderful to see such a packed audience here. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm Stephen Sacker. I host a show on the BBC World News channel called Hard Talk. And we're going to have some hard talk today with a very distinguished panel, all of whom bring a wealth of experience to talking about Ukraine, the security situation here, and the future as they see it of this country, particularly in security terms. So very quickly, I know Victor gave you a quick heads up on who's on the panel, but I will just add to that by saying next to me here we have Ash Carter, who was Secretary of Defense under the Barack Obama administration from 2015 to 17. Ash Carter, also a physicist, a man who has a great deal of experience, particularly in affairs concerning missile technology and disarmament issues. Worked some time on North Korea as well as on issues concerning the former Soviet Union, so brings a wealth of experience on all of those fronts to us today. Next to Ash Carter, we've got General Wesley Clark. Got a very distinguished, long US military career, which ended with him being Supreme Commander Europe at NATO, commanded NATO forces in Kosovo. Also, it has to be said, developed a political career, which saw him sort of consider and then not quite run for president a couple of times. So he brings political insight as well as military experience. And our third panelist, General Jack Keane, who again has an extraordinarily distinguished career in the US military, various different fields of operation going all the way back to Vietnam, and Mideast, Afghanistan, all sorts of places. Also now one of America's very respected security analysts who has been advising politicians, not least on policy in Eastern Europe and toward Russia as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give our panel a very, very warm welcome. What I want to do today is make this very interactive. We've got a fabulous audience here. Some of you are students here at this university and from other universities around Ukraine. Some of you are professionals, either in the diplomatic service, academia, whatever. But a lot of you bring a lot of experience to debates about Ukraine and the security situation here. But not just experience, you all live here. And that really matters. So I'm going to ask some questions of our panel at the beginning, but then quickly we're going to open it up to you guys. And I don't just mean you in the front, I mean everybody at the back too. I've got pretty good eyesight, so I'm going to ask you to raise a hand, and we're going to get a lot of questions in over the next hour and 20 minutes or so. That's the idea, but I'm going to kick off, and I'm going to ask each of my panelists to give me some opening reflections. And I have to say, I've been in Ukraine many times, but on this occasion, thanks to the snow, I've actually only been here for a few hours. But I've already had conversations with diplomats, with students from the university and a few others, all of whom, I have to say, remarkably bleak about where Ukraine is today. And in terms of the security situation and the conflict, we're about to see the 4th anniversary of the Ukrainian conflict, which followed the Maidan, of course. And it does look like a frozen conflict, and it looks as though Putin has got Ukraine where he wants it. And I wonder, first of all, for all of you, whether you'd agree with that proposition of the bleakness of the situation, and some opening thoughts on how there might be initiatives to unfreeze the frozen conflict. So start with you, Ashley.
Well, it's not bleak, but it is serious, and the conflict isn't frozen. So let me tell you why I say both of that.
Ashton, do you have a mic that you can...
I do.
Yeah, go on.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Is that better? Okay. What I said was that it is serious, but it's not bleak. Number one. Number two, the conflict is not frozen. I'll return to both of those things in just a moment. But can I just say, for myself, I just ended 36 years in working on national and international defense. And I want to commend those of you, the younger faces I see here, who are here today because you have taken interest. Maybe you are launching a career, civilian or military, in this field. And I just want to say I'm honored to be one of you. There's nothing better than being part of something bigger than yourself in life. And giving people security is the greatest thing you can do. But security is like oxygen. If you have it, you don't think about it. But if you don't have it, it's all you think about. The most precious thing you can do is help protect your people, our civilization, make a better world for our children. So I'm proud to be one of you. I'm also very proud to be back in Ukraine. I've been here many times, like everybody on this panel. It was 25 years ago that I started coming here, and I have been committed since then, and I believe my country is as well, to the independence and the territorial integrity and the strength and the self-determination of the Ukrainian people. And and this future here is not bleak, but the situation is serious. And it's important that Ukraine continue to develop, now speaking for defense, its defensive capabilities. I think the United States and the Western countries need to be committed to helping them. Russia, once upon a time, we thought we would be able to do more positive with Russia. In recent years, particularly under President Putin, the scope of issues on which we have been able to work cooperatively with Russia has steadily narrowed. So whether it's in Ukraine, annexation of the Crimea, Donbass, other malign activities in Eastern Europe, hybrid warfare, little green men, cyber attacks, their complete troublemaking in Syria, nuclear saber rattling, and on and on and on. I'm just sorry, it is not a good picture, and we collectively need to stand strong.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you think, in reflection and looking back, you, as Secretary of Defense under Barack Obama for the last couple of years, when things were going so wrong, really, in the relationship with Russia, but in particular with regard to Ukraine, could you have done more? Do you wish you'd done more?
Well, just to be clear, I was not Secretary of Defense in 2013 and 2014.
I understand that, but you inherited a situation.
I want to do more, yes. The answer is yes. We could have. I would like us to see us now do more, no question about it. And here's the things we can do. We should talk about that. There are a host of areas in terms of weapon systems, but other kinds of systems like air defense systems, intelligence systems, and so forth. There's the whole reform agenda for the Ukrainian military, which is necessary in order to continue to strengthen it. These are all things where I think the United States can do more, should do more. I cannot speak for the US government now, but I believe there is widespread support in the United States for that. And there's no support really at all for the idea that that this conflict is frozen.
All right. Well, Ashton, that's a terrific opening contribution. I thank you for it. We'll get our two other contributors for their opening thoughts. Wesley Clark, this proposition that Putin, frankly, right now has got the Ukraine situation where he wants it, and that the West, led by the United States, appears unable or unwilling to do much about it. What do you say to that proposition?
First, I want to say I came here the first time in 1964. I was a 19-year-old college student. I was a sophomore at West Point. I'd studied Russian for 2 years, and I was desperate to meet beautiful young Ukrainian women in Kiev. Unfortunately, it was very difficult during those years because as soon as we said we were from Shah, they ran the other direction.
Well, maybe your Russian wasn't good enough.
Oh, the Russian was good. I passed my defense language exam. I was fluent. In fact, I spent 3 hours arguing in the Museum of Lenin here in Kiev about the superiority of Marxism, Leninism versus capitalism. And so when you say maybe things are bleak here, let me tell you, they're 100% better than they were in 1964. I came back here in 2000. I was the NATO commander. I met General Kuzma, who was the Minister of Defense, and President Kuchma. Things are better now than they were then. I was back again in 2004, 2005 as a guest of Viktor Pinchuk. They're better now. I was here numerous times after 2014, and I'm so impressed by the courage and the strength of the people of Ukraine to have gone through the Maidan and then be horribly disappointed and shocked by the reaction of Mr. Putin and the invasion, the seizure of Crimea, and then this incredible outpouring of public support that saw the defense and ending with the defense in Debaltseve, which frustrated the Russian plans to take over the entire oblast. And I want to ask, are there any of you here who served in uniform or are still in the armed forces in Ukraine? If so, would you stand up and let us recognize you?
There's one.
All right,
yeah.
I see some. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So where we are right now is that Putin has a tiger by the tail. He didn't realize that he couldn't walk over Ukraine. He thought he could get most of Ukraine. He was willing to give up the Western Ukrainians and let it be part of Poland and cause more problems for the West. He was shocked, I think, by the degree of resistance here in Ukraine, and I think he's still frustrated. It's a continuing drag on Russia's military. He's using it. Now, it's a training ground. He's rotating his officers through. And so how must we think about it? Well, first of all, we must continue, Ukraine must continue to defend its front and hold its line. It must do so as strategically as possible and with as much conservation of manpower as possible. The measure of merit is hold the defense stable and don't lose troops in the process. So you have to learn the lessons. What is it that makes the force vulnerable to snipers? What is it that makes it vulnerable to drone attack? What makes it vulnerable to artillery fire? And so it's a continuing learning process. It's action, reaction, counteraction. And so in the Ukrainian Armed Forces, you have the first-hand opportunity to build a learning organization. Now, in the United States...
Can I interrupt, if I may, Wesley, because I want to make sure we get as many different voices in as possible, as quickly as possible, but just to follow up on what you're saying right now, you're talking about maintaining the line and maintaining the current position and being strong and learning from military experience, but all of that suggests something of a frozen front line and a frozen conflict. Vladimir Putin put out there the possibility of UN intervention, some sort of blue helmets coming in and internationalizing the confrontation and leading to some sort of political process. Should Ukraine be buying into that? Would it be a way of creating a new dynamic?
No, not unless the UN is there in a furtherance of the full implementation of Minsk, and that means the UN has to go into Russia. So you can't put UN forces just on this line of contact and simply freeze the line of contact. That is a frozen force. That is what Putin wants. What Ukraine wants is it wants its sovereignty over its own territory back, including the sovereignty over Crimea, and that's what the West wants also.
All right, thank you, Wesley. General Keane, we're going to bring you in now. It's the same opening proposition for you, but I just wonder whether you see any dynamism in the security situation right now, or whether, frankly, there isn't really very much changing at all.
Yeah, well, let me just get to that by another means. First of all, I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues. I'm delighted to be here with the BBC and the great anchors. And it's wonderful to be here with all of you, so I'm excited about it. Listen, the post-Cold War era that we knew since 1991 is essentially over, because we have returned to big power competition again in the world. Certainly not on the scale that we were used to with the Soviet Union, but Russia clearly is dangerous, very capable, and has significant geopolitical ambitions that are on a collision course with the international order as we have known it for 70 years. China, rising power economically to be sure, but also geopolitically, has revised the order in the Pacific already. And clearly President Xi has stated in 20 years he wants to replace the United States as preeminent global power in the world. So the contours of global security issues are changing right before our eyes, and we have to adjust to it. Here in Ukraine, what Russia was able to do, I think, successfully, is blur the lines between peace and war in a way that we've never seen before. And he introduced hybrid forces and proxy forces, a massive disinformation campaign run on his own people, providing a narrative of why he's here, run against you, providing justification for why he's here. And then, very successfully, that disinformation campaign was run against your allies, the United States and Europeans. For what purpose? To keep those allies at distance, to paralyze the decision-making process, because the lines were blurred between peace and war, and guess what? That worked. And we did not act, even though Crimea took place, even though Eastern Europe took place. So the characterization of what is happening here, this is the front lines of new generation warfare, a doctrine that the Russians have espoused, led by their chief of staff, who crafted this doctrine, and they fully intend, because of some of the success that they've achieved here, to carry this out in Eastern Europe, etc. They're also moving into the Middle East to replace the United States as the most influential country outside of the region in the Middle East. And the intrusion into Syria is just the beginning of what they intend to do with the Iranians. Significant geopolitical ambitions on the part of Vladimir Putin. And I'm telling you what, we haven't even come close to adjusting to it. Not even close. The United States of America, European leaders are just beginning to understand Russian aggression and what this ambition is. We don't have the deterrence against it, similar to what we had against the Soviet Union. Many of the leaders involved here lack the political and moral will to get their people behind this, and that's the reality of what we're facing.
You mean leaders in Ukraine?
I believe the United States and your European allies failed you here when Putin blurred the lines between peace and war. He successfully paralyzed our decision-making process. That should certainly not be the case now. And I'm hopeful that American leadership will step up here and provide the kind of leadership we need to deal with Russian aggression, not only here in the Ukraine, but in Eastern Europe, and also what they intend to do in the Middle East.
All right,
that is going to take indispensable leadership and political and moral will and determination to do it.
Right, well that is a very clear statement, so let's push you and let's dig down into specifics. Two things for you on the panel to think about. Number one, NATO. Nobody right now in NATO seems to be serious about discussing a track to Ukrainian membership of NATO. It's been discussed for years in a very theoretical way, but nobody, least of all now that there is this conflict on Ukraine's sovereign territory, seems remotely serious about finding a way to get Ukraine into NATO. Does that need to change, or is that just pie in the sky?
I'm just speaking for myself now. You know I would like to see more done by the West with Ukraine. I'll let the others speak for themselves. I think NATO needs also to do more with Ukraine. And just to be clear, it is important that there be a path to NATO membership for Ukraine. That has been part of the roadmap since 1994. I understand that that is aspirational and there are many obstacles to achieving that. And there are very many important milestones along the way, including the very strong partnership we now have, major non-member NATO status for Ukraine, which is within sight, and ultimately NATO membership. But I don't think we ought to say that there cannot be a very meaningful, mutually protective relationship between the United States and Ukraine, or NATO and Ukraine, until
right.
That's the only thing.
Well, except, I mean, Ukrainians, they watch the news and read the newspapers just like everybody else. And when you've got a president in the White House who has very grave doubts about the long-term coherence and credibility of NATO anyway, but also a president who's got a very complex relationship with Vladimir Putin, which we don't want to spend too much time on, but let's just say it's complex. It's very hard to believe that the United States of America is serious in its sort of talk of one day Ukraine getting into NATO when you've got that context, the Trump administration in office in Washington.
I think you've got extremely strong public support in the United States for the independence of Ukraine and the eventual unification or membership of Ukraine in NATO. But I want to make sure our Ukrainian friends understand this. NATO is a political alliance. It's not a military alliance up front. That is to say, it's run by the heads of state of all the NATO member governments. It's staffed by diplomats. The generals come underneath the diplomats and the public servants and the politicos. And NATO moves legally, it moves systematically, it moves cautiously. So NATO's not going to lurch in here. NATO's watching right now. NATO's strengthening its capacities to respond to potential threats against NATO members in the Baltics right now. But NATO's learning from Ukraine, and what NATO wants to see in Ukraine is it wants to see civilian control of the military, it wants to see an end to war profiteering, and it wants to see greater compatibility as the Ukrainian forces are modernized with NATO operating standards, procedures, and equipment. And all that process is underway. As former Secretary of Defense Carter said, we're looking at major non-NATO ally status for Ukraine, and I'd like to see us put Ukraine on the path to membership in NATO.
And I want to come back to that political analysis, you know, the West looking in at Ukraine's politics in just a moment. But just to finish up on what the West can do right now in security terms, General Keane, Ash Carter, in his opening remarks, mentioned weapon supplies, the kind of weaponry that the Ukrainians would love to have, but the United States and others are refusing to give them. Is there any prospect, realistic prospect, of that kind of weaponry being sent to Ukraine in the foreseeable future?
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to correct something that Stephen said. There's Trump in the campaign, and there's Trump as president. Not too dissimilar from many politicians, I would suggest. The fact is that President Trump came to Warsaw, made a speech supporting NATO, Article 5, supporting 70 years of the international Western order based on our collective values. That was the center part of his speech. So this equivocation that he's not supporting NATO, I don't believe is borne out by the facts. Now we got to see what the actions are as a result of that. Here's where I think we are. Secretary Tillerson on December the 7th in Vienna, Austria said the following: the relationship with Russia is never going to improve until we resolve the situation in Ukraine. The United States takes very seriously the invasion of another country's territory. Until we resolve the annexation of Crimea and the intrusion into eastern Ukraine, this relationship is not, I say again, not going to improve. And everything else is of a lesser order than that. And he became specific. And this obviously will cause some grief depending on where you are. But he said Syria, lesser order. Russia meddling in US election, that's a lesser order. That caused a storm back in the United States, a statement like that. But I'm mentioning that to you, Secretary Tillerson isn't out here winging foreign policy and national security. He's out here speaking for the President of the United States. And when he makes a statement like that, take it serious. When he was sitting next to Lavrov in his first press conference in Moscow with the Russian media sitting right in front of him, Tillerson said this: the relationship is at its worst we've seen in decades. Until, looks at Lavrov, until you agree with the Minsk agreement and disengage your forces, there is no possibility of this relationship improving.
Right, but as there's no sign, as there's
to
no
get
sign
to
of
Stephen's question,
yeah,
I believe what I think is going to happen here. I know recommendations are being made to the President about what to do about Ukraine, and I think most of those are positive, in the lines of what we're talking about, some kind of lethal assistance. The Congress of the United States just passed legislation a couple of weeks ago, $350 million set aside for Ukraine with the authorization for some lethal assistance. Half of that is conditional based on institutional reform, civilian control of the military, corruption, etc., some of the things that General Clark talked about. But I think where we're heading is President Trump wants to deal with the leader. And at some point, he's going to deal with Putin. I don't believe he'll make a weapons decision until that takes place. And I think he wants to arm wrestle with Putin, so to speak. And he believes in his own skill set to be able to have a decent relationship and deal with tough issues. I'm not trying to be Pollyannish about President Trump. I mean, he brings issues to the table, to be sure. But he believes in his own skill set in dealing with foreign leaders. And until that is taken place, I don't think we'll have a decision out of the White House about lethal assistance. I think the much larger issue is the strategic issue in dealing with Russian aggression writ large by the European Atlantic Alliance in coming to grips with what this really portends for the region.
All right, I'm just going to let Ash just pick up. I know you wanted to say something in response.
I just want to say, I obviously can't speak for the Trump administration, President Trump, but it is worth saying that the idea of a rapprochement with Russia under these circumstances has no support in the strategic community in the United States. It has no support in the media. As you can tell, it has no support in the Congress. And I don't think any support among Western countries as well. And so I think the uniformity of strength, including for support for Ukraine, as I look at it, and this is why things aren't bleak entirely to me, that part is encouraging. Ukraine is working to strengthen itself. Yes, it's been up and down and so forth, but overall it has been an upward trend. And I think the Western nations, and yes, they came to it late, you know, maybe 10 years late and slowly, but are gathering to the point of recognizing that there needs to be strength with respect to Russia. I really do think.
Well, it's interesting that, and I'm going to ask Wesley Clark one more question, and then Wesley, I'm going to have to release you after that because you've reached pretty much your time limit. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately General Clark has to catch a plane through the snow to London, and we're not very good at dealing with snow in London, so he's got to get to the airport quick, otherwise the plane may take off without him. So, just before you go, Wesley Clark, I just want to ask you this, and it picks up on what we've just heard from General Keane and from Ash Carter about the Western commitment to Ukraine. And General Keane was quoting Rex Tillerson, who not only talked about the degree to which the United States is deeply concerned about Putin and Russia's strategy, but also to paraphrase him, he said something a bit like this. He said, the problem in Ukraine is, you know, it's difficult to fight for the body of Ukraine if the soul of the country is going to hell, by which he meant, you know, there's extreme concern in the United States and the West that right now governance in Ukraine is not in a good place. In fact, it's in a very, very bad place. And we see the demonstrations of thousands of people on the streets, some of whom are demanding the removal of the president, some of whom are talking about launching a new Maidan movement. Many young people I've spoken to today saying that they are so upset with what is going wrong in this country. That undermines Ukraine's case in the West, doesn't it?
Well, look, there's two issues here. There's the issue of governance in Ukraine, and there's the issue of outside interference. Now, there's nobody in Ukraine who's informed about this who doesn't believe that there are not strings being pulled, money being exchanged, and influence being pushed inside Ukraine to feed this disorder. But I would say this, and this is coming back to what you started with, Steve. The situation in Ukraine is not bleak in comparison. You just got to stand back and look at this. You've got the opportunity that generations of Ukrainians wanted over the centuries to have an independent, Western-oriented, democratic state in Ukraine. Is it going to just, bang, appear by magic? No, it doesn't work that way. Political institutions have to be crafted, and there's a struggle. If you want easy, smooth governance, go to China. Xi Jinping will take care of everything for you. You don't have to worry about it. You can just make money. If you want independence, if you want the chance to express your views, then you're going to have to put up with a little disorder in this process. Now, it's a little hard for me to come in here as an outsider and get down into the nuts and bolts of why there's disorder and what the respective positions are in Ukraine. But I would say this, the Western institutions that have dealt here and the representatives here have been pretty clear that you need to crack down on corruption, primarily on the war profiteering side. And I think that has to be done in order to deliver an efficient defense. But as we would say in English, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're going to get to the bottom of the corruption. It's going to happen. Hang with the system. I would, as an outsider, I'd be very disappointed to see another Maidan. I'd be very disappointed to see some third color revolution in the middle of this. We're asking Ukraine, why? Because we're asking Ukraine in the middle of a war to live up to the highest civic standards. Listen, there's corruption in every country in the world, including my own. I travel from place to place in the United States. I see people every day in jail. Just a second, Stephen. We just put the 66-year-old treasurer of the state of Arkansas in jail for 10 years for corruption on selling state bonds. She was taking a payoff. So
yeah, because that's in the United States, by and large, the rule of law is still the gold standard. It's still independent. It's real, and the big fish who are involved in corruption eventually get found out and they get sent to jail.
And they will get found out here. But understand one thing: you're going against an opposing force here. It's a military force, an economic force, and it's a subversive force inside Ukraine. So I don't want us in the West.
Yeah, but hang on.
Just a second. I want to finish my point, Steve.
Go on.
I don't want us in the West to set unrealistic standards. You know, Jack and I fought in Vietnam, and what we saw in Vietnam was a country that was invaded, under threat, under attack, and at the same time, we set up and ran elections in that country. And they were pretty good elections. And we helped the country become economically self-sufficient and actually a rice exporter. And they got no credit for it. So I think it's very easy for people to throw rocks at this, and when they see it up front. But I just want to say, as someone who's been through this for a few years, when you're fighting a war and you're mobilizing forces and you're trying to change everything at once, everything's not going to happen at once. So for the young people who are concerned, I'd like to see them join the volunteer regiments. I'd like to see them go to school and, as Ash Carter was saying, study security, get involved in the government in a constructive way, and let's bring Ukraine forward as a great partner of the West. You're on the front line of Western civilization here. We want you, and we want you as a member of NATO.
But just as a final thought on this, are you seriously saying to me that when the proposition comes up, you know what, we need to toughen up those sanctions against Vladimir Putin, we need to start sending more lethal weaponry into Ukraine to help the forces of the government there stand up to Russian aggression? Are you seriously saying to me that the fact that right now there are so many doubts about the governance of this country, corruption seems to be so rife, so much disaffection amongst the people, are you saying to me that, you know, some of those governments in Europe, for example, like the Italians, the Greeks, the Bulgarians, some others we could name, who are more inclined to be sympathetic to Putin and Russia, are you saying they don't immediately say, you seriously want us to front up for Ukraine when its government is run so badly that its own people want to get rid of it?
Yes, I'm going to tell you that as an American, I'm going to tell those governments to front up for Ukraine. I've been with those governments, I've been in those countries. I don't want to name any names, but I'll just say...
feel free.
No, that's BBC hard talk standard, Steve. I'm not going to go BBC standard here. I'm going to say this, that there's no country in Europe that doesn't have its issues with corruption. Where there's money, where there's human nature, there's corruption. And so you have to have systems to work on it. So in Ukraine, let's prioritize this. What we're really interested in first and foremost is we're interested in the efficient use of defense resources. The second thing we're interested in is the credibility of leadership. So our leadership in Ukraine has got to crack down on and do its best to eliminate war profiteering. When you've got men and women in combat and they're dying for the freedom of this country, they shouldn't be concerned that someone in the rear area is making excessive profits at the expense of their lives and welfare. And that's what the issue is. Fix that issue and you'll win the moral authority of every nation in the West. Thanks very much. Yeah. And I just want to say again in conclusion how proud so many of us are who served in the Cold War, who have a long association with Ukraine, to see the courage and the stamina of the people of Ukraine. Congratulations, we want you in NATO.
General Clark, thank you very, very much indeed. Thanks for your contribution. Thank you very much. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we can all appreciate General Clark's passion. His passion has almost made him late for getting his plane. I hope to goodness he catches it, but we're going to say goodbye to General Clark because he does have to rush to the airport. I don't know, General King, whether you want to come and sit?
I just wanted to make a statement.
Yeah, go on.
To follow on what Wes is talking about here. Yes, I think the point is well made that the corruption issue gets disproportionate to other reforms that need to take place here. If you listen closely to what's coming from the United States, and I think from your European partners as well, is the principle of civilian control of the military is very important. How do you use your parliament in holding the Defense Department and the defense industry accountable, making your budget and open to the people? Right now, the whole budget is mostly all classified. In the United States of America, only a very small piece of our budget is not exposed to the American people. And even that classified portion is exposed to the Congress, who have certain clearances to be able to hold that execution of the budget accountable. Those are very achievable things that, when you put them in place, you start to have ethical compliance factors that begin to whittle away at this issue. Now listen, when it comes to the United States, we are in Afghanistan for 16 years, propping up one of those corrupt governments we've ever provided assistance to, and we've lost 4,000 soldiers doing it. And thousands of others are maimed for life. And we're doing it because it's in the United States' national interest. We didn't do a litmus test and say, well, is this a corrupt government we're assisting or not? We didn't. We're there because it's in our national interest. We are still in Iraq, finally succeeding at getting rid of ISIS. And it has a government that we've helped to stitch together, but it's got an element of corruption in it that's serious. It doesn't deter us from pursuing our own national interest in helping to stabilize and secure that country. I am convinced in my own mind that what goes on here in Ukraine and what the people have demonstrated by their own political and moral courage, and what your military has demonstrated by their physical courage, how they transform themselves into a capable, well-led, well-trained, disciplined military standing up against a very capable Russian machine, is honor. That is full honor, and you deserve tremendous credit for that. In the United States of America, and I can tell you, in the United States military, we know what is going on here every single day. And we are going to school on what is taking place and what your military is doing, because this is the front lines of future war that Russia fully intends to use again. And it's your military that is teaching us what is happening here in terms of Russian aggression and the capabilities that they're using against your military.
All right. I should hold the thought for a sec, because I do now, ladies and gentlemen, want to open this up to our audience, because I'm sure there are plenty of questions out here on the floor, and I'm going to try and bring in as many as possible, particularly from young people. So we've got microphones, I hope, both at the front and the back. I'll start at the front, and then I promise you I'll go to the back. And we're going to take questions in English or in Ukrainian if you want to ask in Ukrainian. Let me start over here. There's a lady there. Yeah, you stand up.
World News, Nadia is my name. How do you assess the impact of fake news on the safety situation around the world and in Ukraine especially? And if the situation can be improved by creating some independent computer system which can filter some fake news from around the world? Thank you.
Okay. You're a journalist, aren't you? I wasn't going to call on the journalist first, but nonetheless you were very clever. You got in early, so well done. Okay, this question of fake news and how you see it affecting the security situation in this Ukraine conflict. Ash, you start.
Well, it's a very good question, and
microphone now. I'm sorry.
It's a very good question, and we all need to understand that information technology, the digital revolution, creates prosperity, commerce, it all creates community, but it also gives an enormous highway to the forces of darkness. And I don't think that the pioneers of the information revolution appreciated that. I think they were blind to it. Many of them still resist the idea that they have any responsibility for it. I think they do have a responsibility. And I think your public authorities, of which I was until 11 months ago one of them, I think the citizens have a reasonable expectation of us that we protect them. In my case, against attack through that method, but in the case of civil society, from manipulation.
From your inside knowledge, do you think that to a certain extent Putin is outsmarting the West when it comes to the use of information, misinformation, and digital technologies?
Well, it's not outsmarting because these are tactics that anybody can use. It is outfoxing in the sense that we do not use our capabilities for that purpose. So this is an issue of values. And the values that he is using information technology for, like the values that some people use it for crime or extortion or to distort the news, is what I would call the dark side of it. There's no question about it. And you know, I did want to say something, if I may, and I want to turn back the clock a little bit here, but on the issue of corruption, I think we need to be very careful. I'm not a Ukrainian, I'm an American, and it's not for me to come and preach to you about corruption. And fighting corruption is not a gift that Ukrainians owe to outsiders. It's something for them. I do hope, I think it's a very important thing in society. We fight it every day, but you have to have systems that, and you have to set those systems up, judicial ones, one within the military military procurement system. And since most people are good most of the time, that system helps tell the good people what they should do. And it also helps make the bad people visible. So it's important to have a good system to prevent corruption, even as it is important to have good prosecutorial systems to find corruption and go after corruption. But I can't tell you that you should do it for me, and I certainly won't tell you that you should be patient with the system. We shouldn't be patient with the system. We should want the system to change and serve us. But I want to be careful because we're getting into a point where the enthusiasm of the three of us for things in Ukraine it's fine for us to be enthusiastic on your behalf, but I want to say, and I'm sure the others would say the same thing, I don't want to preach.
All right. Okay. Well, look, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a U.S. Defense Secretary and a 4-star general with us, so we've got another 25 minutes or so. So let's get more questions. I'm going to take 2 at once, so we speed up a little bit. And you know, I'll try and take one from behind the cameras. There's a lady, you, ma'am, right on my eye line. Yeah, stand up and give us your question if you can.
Hello. My name is Vladislava Smolinska, and we've just talked about the military procurement, and I would like to ask a question about that. I would like to address Mr. Carter in this. So, as I know, the percent of public procurement in defense and security in the United States that is closed, like the information that is closed, is about 5%. And now the respective number in Ukraine is about 95%. So we all know that such number entails like high corruption risks. And having in mind this and having in mind that the war is being waged, like how reasonable is this number? And if it's not reasonable, what should it be? Like what number what number of such information should be disclosed in Ukraine?
Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you very much. You, sir, right down here, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Konstantin Batowski. I'm a political scientist, and I witnessed this war from its very beginning in Donetsk. I'm from Donetsk myself. So the question is, you know, when the whole thing has started, it was a feeling that the world does not enough. The Budapest Memorandum and the amount of the help which was immediately given to Ukraine, we had a feeling that it wasn't sufficient. However, we understood that there was the work behind the scenes, and the world came together with a coalition that actually came with sanctions and helped Ukraine. And the question is there a time to talk about a real neo-containment of Russia as it used in the Cold War times? What are the parameters of such neo-containment in terms of politics and in terms of our military aspect? What are the red lines and what are the perspectives? Thank you very much.
Okay, good. So two good questions here. I don't know if either of you has strong feelings about who answers which, but on the military procurement question, we've already established that in Ukraine, roughly 95% of the military budget is secret, is not open to transparency, to accountability. And the question has said, you know, if it's 5% in the US and 95% in Ukraine, what should Ukraine be getting to before one can say, well, that's reasonable? You know, that is at least getting some of this secrecy out of the system. What's your feeling?
Well, 5%. It's your money, first of all. I spent $600 billion of the U.S. taxpayers' money every year. In fact, before I was Secretary of Defense, I was the so-called weapons czar. That is the guy who bought all the systems. And as you know, in this part of the world, the title czar is a pretty good title to have. And but I was always mindful, and I always told the people who worked for me, this was not our money. This is the taxpayers' money. They deserve to know what it is being used for, unless, and that's where the 5% comes in, that knowledge will compromise its utility by revealing something about it to potential enemies that would compromise it. And those cases exist.
But did you talk about this very subject to the Poroshenko government?
Of course, yes, I did, and I worked very closely with it. I have to say, I have many good colleagues in the defense ministry over 25 years, and civilian control, budget transparency, control of the defense industry so that it serves the military of this country, and if it sells abroad, does so only subject to the foreign policy of this country. A reform in the officer ranks so that young people are given a chance. And all the changes in doctrine and tactics and equipment, including ones we've discussed that the United States and other countries should help with. This is all part of the project for the future, part of strengthening Ukraine. So I think that's all important. Has it all been realized? No, of course not.
No, but see, what I'm getting at, Ash, is we don't often get a chance to sit like this and hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak, from a very recently former US Defense Secretary, because I'm just trying to get a handle on when you and other senior colleagues all the way through the administration say to your Ukrainian counterparts, look guys, you know, in our opinion, you really need to address this issue. In particular right now, we're talking about the way you handle your defense budget and the degree to which you allow transparency and accountability into the system. What I'm interested in is the degree to which you think Ukraine listens to people like you.
Well, it's a sovereign country, so they don't have to, but most did, most of the time. And most of the people I talked to...
But they haven't changed anything. I mean, they don't. They didn't listen because they haven't really changed anything.
Well, I told you the people I talked to. Now, you're going to ask a bunch of cynical questions about whether it was successful or not, and that's your...
They're not cynical. They're actually rather important.
That's your business. But I'm not going to tell you that everybody I've worked with has not tried. I will also tell you that it hasn't been all successful, and I'll also tell you that some of the people I've worked with over 25 years in Ukraine have proved to be great disappointments to me. No question about it. And Ukraine has not gotten where I would like it to have gotten during those 25 years. But I'm not. But you're suggesting that nobody's doing anything, and I'm sorry, but that's not.
I'm just asking. I'm asking direct questions. I'm not suggesting, but I think you're giving. You're beginning to give us a picture of a certain disappointment you feel.
Well, sure. I'd like to have seen more done. No question about it. I'd like to have seen the Ukrainian military be in a stronger position than it was in 2014. It is now much stronger than it was in 2014. I would have liked to see, just to spread the responsibility around a little bit, the West, including my own country, wake up earlier to the change that was overtaking Russia. In 1994, we hoped for, perhaps naively, but we hoped for a different future with Russia. It has turned out to be disappointing. And I think that realization came late. It is coming now, and there it is. But you know, this is public life, and it doesn't always turn out the way you want. But you've got to keep trying. And
all right.
In the case of Ukraine, I am generally very hopeful, and I'm certainly dedicated to Ukraine.
Well, thank you for that. That's actually really interesting, and it's actually a neat segue into the second question we had. And Jack Keane, I want you to address this one, which was the gentleman saying, is it time now for a new, coherent, fully fledged containment, neo-containment policy, he said, toward Russia, just as we saw toward the Soviet Union through the Cold War? Is it time for that?
Well, it's time, certainly, to have a comprehensive approach to deter Russia's aggression. Put whatever word you want on it. And it has to be comprehensive. It has to be political, economic, diplomatic, and military. And I would suggest we're not even close. We're just going to be honest with ourselves. What's taking place here? We got a lot of feckless leaders in Europe who aren't stepping up to this. And they actually fear Russian aggression. We have to find their spine a little bit.
Well, you think... What, Germany was feckless? Angela Merkel was feckless?
I'm not getting into the specifics. I'm going to stay right there, okay? And you know, you have the same view of it that I have. I'll bet on it. And I believe that the United States should have been exercising stronger leadership when it became obvious what was happening, that Russia was trampling on U.S. national interests and those of our allies in this region. And we haven't done it. And that's the reality of it. And yes, we do need a comprehensive strategy to deal with this.
And do you fear, I mean, I won't dig any further into who's feckless, but do you fear there's a decoupling between...
I knew you would love that word.
Yeah, I like that word.
Yeah,
do you
if you want me to associate a name with it, I got it.
Well, I planted one in your head, but you didn't seem to like that. But anyway, do you fear that there is a decoupling of United States perspective and the West European perspective on this issue of how to view and deal with Putin right now? And is that at the heart of a profound problem inside NATO?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I didn't know for sure where President Trump would be on reassuring allies and partners and confronting adversaries. The campaign was so uneven in this area of foreign policy and national security. It was focused largely on economics, jobs, and immigration, some of the problems it was causing us. But I think the contours of it are relatively clear, and that is reassuring allies and willingness to confront adversaries. And clearly we have a major problem here with an adversary. And there's no doubt in my mind that the United States is clear-eyed about Russia's aggression here and the fact that we have to deter it. That there is no thought of a rapprochement with Russia. There is a thought that the President of the United States can have a working relationship with an adversary and still try to achieve some common objectives when they materialize. That is kind of where he is in his head, I believe, and I'm speculating about it from listening to the things that he says. Don't translate that into this president is going to forfeit some of the United States national interests here and those of our allies. I don't believe that's going to happen at all.
All right, Jack, thank you very much. I want to get a gentleman, a soldier in uniform into the debate, because I think that would be an interesting perspective. So, yeah, you, sir, you've got a microphone. Give us your question, then we'll come back toward the front. Go on, sir. You with the uniform and the microphone, yeah?
Старший сержант Зелений, Збройні Сили України. У мене дуже коротке питання щодо кібербезпеки Збройних сил України. Ось, є в уряді України в співпраці з урядом Сполучених Штатів Америки якась програма або плани щодо покращення ситуації з кібербезпекою Збройних сил України?
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that, sir. We'll take one more question, then we'll deal with two at once because it just saves a bit of time. Yeah, you, sir, you've attracted my attention. I don't know how you've done it, but stand up and give us your question. Actually, we need a microphone. There you go. When you got the microphone, off you go.
Thanks very much. I never dreamt that I'm going to be talking to you personally because I always watch you on the BBC.
Yeah, but don't do this. These guys, these are the experts.
Sure, of course. Thanks very much. Great opportunity. Thanks. I'd like to pose my question. I'm a Middle Eastern expert, basically. I'm an Arabist, and I have to comment a lot on Syria, etc. And I have a very strong impression that these two conflicts are very much connected. I'm not going to elaborate on that. You probably know what I'm talking about. There is one thing, which you touched upon in general opinion, that, the relations are low or high, now they're low with Russia, etc. But frankly speaking, Russia has taken the US for a ride in Syria. What happened, the negotiations with Kerry, etc., they were talking peace and they were fighting war and very successfully right at the very moment. Essentially the connection, the essence of this connection between the two conflicts to my mind is that while Russia continues to be successful in the Middle East, it will hardly ever think of stopping the conflict here or adhering to Minsk or whatever,
So,
because
come with a question, though.
Yes, the question is, I'd like to hear your perspective on this relationship between the two conflicts and what should or could or is now the US policy, the strategy towards the Syrian war and towards the Middle East, the allies in the Middle East.
All right, thank you, sir. So let's deal with these quick because we want to get as many questions in as possible. So the soldier, the gentleman in uniform, wanted to know what's being done on this issue of cybersecurity, and is Ukraine working maybe with American help really addressing the issue? Microphone.
I'm happy to talk about that. I just cannot let sit, though, any longer what this gentleman just said about Russia and the Middle East. So I just got to...
Well, yeah, but we've all got a brain capacity to deal with two questions. So start with the first one, then you can get to the second one.
Well, the first one has a better premise, which is that the United States and Ukraine should work together more in cyber. And yes, there are things that we can't. There are some things that we are doing. General Abizade over here. Working with Ukraine in that regard. Let me just tell you what those kind of specifics are. And by the way, we do these with NATO nations as well. They have to do with increasing the resilience, first of all, the hardening of our own information systems. The information systems that were designed between 50 and 30 years ago were designed for collaboration. They are inherently hard to defend. But there are things you can do, steps you can take to defend them and strengthen them. Those are the things that we're teaching one another within the NATO nations and also with Ukraine. The other thing is, quite honestly, we need to learn how to do this ourselves and get better at it. It is a tool of warfare. And if in a case where an enemy is using aircraft or air defenses or forces against you, you have to be able to use information in this new way, the way we always have used the radio frequency spectrum to disrupt their operations and to make sure that your own forces can operate through and fight through that kind of disruption. So there's a lot we can do. It is the exchange of tradecraft, hygiene for the protection of networks, and I know some of that is going on. I think that I put this in the category you raised weapons. But I put this, and I said you have to look at everything. I put this in the category of high priority. But I have no doubt that we can learn from one another because we've done that with other countries. Well, I just got to say something. I got to say something.
But be brief because we want to get more questions.
It can be very brief because it's pretty obvious. The United States, the forces led by the United States just defeated ISIS in Mosul and Raqqa. No other country could have led that defeat than the United States. It did that with Iraqi and Syrian forces. That was necessary to defend civilization against barbarism. We did that. The Russians played no role in it at all, zero. The Russians came into Syria saying they were going to fight terrorism. They've done nothing. They said they were going to come in to end the Syrian civil war. They poured gasoline on it. As a consequence of what the United States has done in Iraq and Syria, it is in a stronger position now than it was a year or two ago. So that's the
very clear. I guess what I'd like to ask, and Jack Keane, just give me a very brief answer on this. Just building on the question which tried to make linkage between, you know, what Russia's doing in Ukraine and what it's doing in the Mideast. Would it be fair to say that given other security threats in the world today, and I'm thinking particularly of the IS jihadist threat as seen from the West and from Washington in particular, and also North Korea as well, is it fair to say that Ukraine and fronting up on Ukraine has fallen down the list of priorities in the United States, that it is not seen as the #1 challenge going into 2018?
That Ukraine is not seen as the #1 challenge?
Yeah, or anything like.
Well, I think Russian aggression is very high on the challenge list. I can't speak for the administration and how they would prioritize it. In terms of near-term threat, certainly I just listened to General McMaster's out at the Reagan Defense Forum, believed that North Korea was it. But also Russian aggression is high on that list, and Ukraine is part of that story. Listen, in answer to the two questions quickly, what has happened here to the question on cyber, particularly at the tactical and operational level to your military organizations, if you're talking to somebody or using electronic spectrum, the Russians have been able to manipulate it and disrupt it. They don't have to destroy it, just manipulate it and disrupt it. That means that that function, whatever that connectivity is, they are able to weaken the effectiveness of that function. For example, they take control of UAVs that the Ukraine military is flying. They don't have to destroy the UAV, they just have to put it someplace else. So, and we are alarmed by that. I mean, just straight out with you, because we don't have very good defenses for what is happening to you at the tactical and operational level. So much so that the Secretary of Defense is putting on hold a major communication infrastructure that was going to be the major backbone of the United States Army in the next generation, because an independent analysis was done of that infrastructure that when we red teamed it against Russian capability, would penetrate it and manipulate it. So we are learning from you in this area. While we're providing some assistance, the fact of the matter is we have to do the same thing that you're doing and learn how to fix this problem.
All right.
The second thing on this issue, listen, the Secretary is absolutely right. What we did in pushing back on ISIS, he started that certainly with President Obama, and President Trump came in, accelerated it to a certain degree, and we've had some success. But to this gentleman's real question dealing with Syria writ large, yes, the Iranians are running the war in Syria every single day. They motivated and inspired the Russians to come in and intervene in the war in 2015 because the moderate opposition forces were making some progress at the Alawite Caliphate on the northwestern part of Syria. As a result of that intervention, they have propped up the Assad regime successfully. When people in my government say there will be eventually a political settlement and Assad will go, that is pure fantasy. That is not going to happen. The Russians and the Iranians have succeeded in propping up a war criminal who has killed over 500,000 of his people, 11 million people are displaced, most significant catastrophe in the western part of the world since World War II. And this administration, which I'm supportive of in certain areas, has no strategy to deal with this. None.
Well, that is fascinating, but let's park it there. I mean, I'm not belittling it for a second. I'd love to chat more about that, but I do think I want to bring it back to Ukraine for right now. So thanks both for the analysis there. I want to go to the back again and get
There's a gentleman waving a device, a phone. There he is. Yeah. So let's give him the microphone. Then we'll come back to the front. Yeah, go on.
Thank you very much. Kirilo Kuznetsov, Trading Economic College. I'd like to ask a question that Russia is by far not the first one who tries to destroy the Ukraine. So we have 1,000 years history, and my question is that you always said that USA doesn't do enough, but if it's possible to create from Ukraine a safety place which will be just, nothing to fear about, or it will be just teared to the pieces by the Russia or some other country?
Right. Sorry, so you're saying, does the panel think that in the end Ukraine will reach a place where it is secure and safe, or whether it's going to be torn apart by Russia? Is that?
Yeah, some place in which I won't hear at the radio every day that our guys are dying in the Crimea or at the Donbass.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll take that one, and we'll take one more. Yeah, you man, waving at me. Yeah, you.
Newsone TV channel, Lydia Petronyuk. I would like to ask about NATO issue against Petro Poroshenko is now pushing forward this question about the referendum about being a member of NATO. But thanks to these social researches, it's like 43% of Ukrainians support NATO and becoming the main member of NATO. So how can NATO itself evaluate this question? If this referendum is reliable or reasonable, and if the result will be no, because it's 43%, not 51 or 60%, is it to announce such referendum now in Ukraine? What is your opinion about this?
Okay, right. So first question seemed to be just a pretty basic one about the military security outlook for this country. I mean, in the end, is there any possibility, as the rather frightening phrase put it, that Ukraine could be ripped apart by the Russian military?
Of course there is. I mean, come on, none of us can take anything for granted. I don't take anything for granted in my own country. Civilization, order, civility, decency, proper behavior, these are not things you can take for granted. These are things you have to show in yourself and expect of others every single day. So nothing's for sure anywhere, including here. But I'm very hopeful. There's a lot of work to do, but if Russia thought that its annexation of Crimea and its intrusions in Eastern Europe were going to redound to its benefit, it has been very wrong. The Ukrainian people, not every single one, but overwhelmingly have opposed and come together in opposition to that intrusion, and so it has strengthened Ukrainian independence and sovereignty, and it has strengthened support on the outside for that. So that should give you confidence, and again, I don't take anything for granted, but just to go back to your first word, I'm not bleak about Ukraine's future. I think it is on the side of values, Western values. It is on the path of self-improvement, which is good for all of us, and those are things that historically succeed.
All right, and Jack, I just want you to take the second question, Jack, because we did spend some time on NATO, but it's an interesting point. The polls suggest if there were a referendum, it would be close, and maybe a majority wouldn't actively vote for NATO membership. How damaging would that be if a referendum was to take place, and therefore, in your opinion, would it be better not to have a referendum at this point?
Well, I think NATO's issue with Ukraine is going to be part of the deterrence factor dealing with Russian aggression, and I don't think a referendum is going to drive NATO's decision. I believe what NATO wants, because we've discussed it before, is certainly movement towards some of the NATO standards that all countries accept, and I'm not going to dwell on that. We've discussed it at depth. The second thing, I think it's unreasonable to expect that with Russian boots on the ground inside Ukraine, that NATO would accept membership of Ukraine under those conditions. I think that condition would have to be removed, and that really is much more of an impact than what the referendum would be on that issue.
Would your advice be not to hold it right now?
That's a political decision. I'm not able to comment on it. I don't understand any politics.
I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, bad news. The sign has come up in bright red on our stage here saying time is up, and that does mean, unfortunately, we're going to have to close. But before we close, I really want to do this just because I come to Ukraine a lot and I care about this country and I'm always interested to gauge the mood. Before we actually finish, let's go back to that first question about whether people are feeling bleak right now. We're at the end of a year, about to go into 2018. Hands up those of you who are feeling pretty optimistic that 2018 is going to be better for Ukraine than 2017 was. How many of you are feeling that way? Yeah, you two can join in. And how many are feeling that, frankly, the way things look right now, they fear 2018 is going to be worse? I have to say, I think a majority are still in the more optimistic, the more positive camp, which is maybe a great way to end this discussion. I, ladies and gentlemen, feel very lucky that we've had such a fantastic panel up here, giving us some real insight into, certainly into the way the United States and maybe the West generally is looking in on the Ukraine situation, the security side of it, but we've slipped, of course, into politics as well. So as we close, just please give a very big thank you to our two remaining panelists, Jack Keane and
Talking to the Ukrainian people, I've been a soldier almost 40 years and still supporting our military all that time. I absolutely commend you for the way that you're supporting your military. I'm proud of you for doing that. Keep it up.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very